Hey everybody. So I did a video recently, and in response to that video, one of my former students got in touch with me and asked me basically to share my experiences that I had directly with ICE or Border Patrol. I'm not really sure which of the two agencies I interacted with, but it was definitely one or the other of them. And then one other experience I had that impacted my viewpoint on Border Patrol and the necessity of ICE, Border Patrol, or some sort of immigration and customs enforcement, which is exactly what ICE stands for. So let me share those stories. First one, this was several years ago. I actually, it was 2020, before COVID actually was known and like nationwide news, but obviously it was uh, happening because COVID-19 is named after 2019, so it was around in 2019. Um, I had gone to Mexico. I traveled in Mexico and spent time and hung out in Mexico around the Cancun area for about 1 to 2 weeks. I don't really remember exactly. I um, was single. I met someone who I felt mutual attraction with, attraction with me, who actually later invited me to return to Mexico and travel with her. And at that time in my life, it didn't make sense. I chose not to. But immediately following returning to the US, I flew into Texas where I had parked my car at an airport and um, and I didn't really have any plans. I was in between two different I was in between seasonal work. I had a month or more free, and I thought, well, if I just drive into Mexico and go spend some time with her. So I was strongly considering that. And I ended up driving down to the Mexico border at like around Brownsville, I think, in between Texas and Mexico on the far east end of Texas. And I kind of looked into crossing there and it just sounded like I'm not somebody to back away from something just because it's been said to be dangerous. You know, I've traveled in Colombia. I've actually crossed from Colombia into Venezuela at the height of the collapse of that country. I've traveled through Mexico to Honduras by bus and back. I've traveled all over Peru, Bolivia, Chile, and a little bit more of South America, and been in plenty of places where people's knee-jerk reaction is to say, that's dangerous. Colombia's dangerous. Isn't that where all the drugs come from? Right? And I'm very aware that just because somebody from afar says that a place is dangerous doesn't mean it's actually going to be, you're going to be in a life-threatening situation just because you go there. But what I was reading about this particular area between Texas and Mexico is like people get killed there and people do not cross that particular um, border very often in a vehicle. Maybe there's illegal crossings happening and stuff like that, but people don't use those roads to cross from the US into Mexico. And people who've tried it have sometimes gotten killed. And it's a very, very lawless, um, dangerous place to be. You're at the mercy of whatever the cartels decide to do if and when they see you in your personal vehicle. And that sounded like something I did not want to mess around with. Like I said, I've been in plenty of areas that people think are dangerous, including parts of Peru that used to be completely run by the Shining Path, which was a terrorist organization, anti-US terrorist organization, which had only recently been opened back up to foreigners, basically, at the time that I was there around, 2012 or so. Been in a lot of places and found them to be very welcoming, warm, wonderful places to be where I didn't feel in danger at all. But this dynamic of, and we can go into this in more detail later, but this dynamic of being at the border of the US and Mexico, that's a dynamic I hadn't experienced before. And it seemed plausible to me that there's a different type of danger in that specific situation. Um, it's like a no man's land, right? It's a zone in which it seems plausible that the vibe is going to be totally different than elsewhere. So, anyways, I didn't cross there. I drove though along the border to Laredo and then beyond Laredo, and just kind of drove along the border, along the roads there on the U.S. side of the border, traveling east-west. Specifically, I was traveling west, just kind of trying to make up my mind. Just like, I'm not sure what to do, so I'll just explore this area, right? This is cool. I've never really been in southern Texas before. Since I'm not sure what I want to do, I'm just going to enjoy where I'm at. That was my mindset. At one point, I got pulled over by Border Patrol, and it was in the U.S. side. I wasn't crossing the border, um, and I didn't know that could happen. You know, I'm a guy from Michigan. We have a border. We share a border with Canada. It's not quite the same dynamic. And I was pretty naive to that. So I was surprised to be pulled over. I was like, I'm not crossing the border. And they said, well, it's kind of weird that you're just here in this general area in your car. I was like, well, it's a road, right? I wasn't sarcastic or rude to the agents. I'm just sharing what I'm thinking from my naive point of view as a Michigander who's never been in this area at all. And the cool thing is that I don't remember the exact words that were said or what I might have said or portrayed that gave off the idea that I was a little confused by it. Not defensive, not angry, not accusing them of, an illegitimate stop or anything. I'm just like, you know, my my MO when pulled over by a law enforcement officer is to comply for self-preservation, if nothing else, and not to be rude. The opposite, to be very polite, be very respectful. Um, and I guess I don't know what I would do. I want to say this right here. If I was in the situation that Alex Preddy was in, I would have helped the woman up too. Okay, so I don't want to make this into portraying myself and my perspective on law enforcement different than it is. I would have helped her up too, because in that situation, I wouldn't have been thinking about law enforcement, not law enforcement. I would have been thinking about, I just saw a woman get shoved to the ground. As a man, my normal human instinct is to help her up, and that's not any form of resistance in my mind towards the officer or towards law enforcement or anything else. So I want to make that clear. But I also want to make it clear that my first instinct when I am approached, and that's another difference there, is that he wasn't actually being approached by the enforcement officer. And that enforcement officer was approaching in a very different way than the ones who approached me in southern Texas. The aggression, the violence, the spraying pepper spray at somebody who wasn't even involved, who had been filming from a distance before that and keeping his distance. I didn't mean to go into the Alex Preddy shooting here, but I want to be super clear that I do think that law enforcement has a responsibility towards the people who they're supposed to serve, because that is their job. But at the same time, if I'm approached by law enforcement, especially approached in a way that is fitting of an enforcement officer whose job is to protect me, check things out. I don't know everything that's going on in their world. I don't know why they're approaching me. So I'm not going to be rude about it. I'm going to be the opposite. I'm going to be respectful, polite. I'm going to do everything they ask me to do. And if I'm not I'm not going to complain about it or resist it, even if it seems a little weird to me or seems like maybe, I'm not sure if they're allowed to ask me this, but hey, if you need to search my car, search my car. Um, I'm not trying to escalate, I'm not trying to cause a problem. And and I don't know exactly what my rights are in that situation. I also don't know what the outcome is going to be of trying to defend my rights, even if I do have rights that they are violating. Um, and I'm not saying that's what happened. What was great about that interaction, because this was a positive interaction, is that they recognized that I was confused about why they were pulling me over, what they were stopping me for, what they were looking for, why they were concerned. And they said, they were just pretty transparent about it. Like, yeah, this is an area where we find bodies in the fields on the American side. There's gang violence, there's what cartel violence, or whatever happening on the Mexican side of the border. They bring bodies here and they dump them. So when we see a vehicle that we're not familiar with in this area and it's not really clear what it's doing, what the intention is, it's just prudent to stop that vehicle. Check on everything, make sure that it's all on the up and up. That sounded pretty reasonable to me. It still sounds pretty reasonable to me. That sounds like people who have a difficult job, a very serious job, and a job that exists for good reasons because of the things that happen, um, doing that job well. I don't know what they do the other, 23 hours and 45 minutes of the day besides the 15 minutes I interacted with them. But in that moment, first of all, I'm not the end all be all judge of whether law enforcement's doing their job well. So even if I didn't think they did their job great at that time, it doesn't mean they're not doing it great. Um, but I felt that it was very, very reasonable. And I also appreciated and still appreciate that they gave me that information about why they stopped people, why they were stopping me. It didn't feel personal. It didn't feel like it was an affront towards me. It felt like it was something that is necessary because of what happens in that area. And again, I think that there's a deeper discussion to have here that is basically, why does it happen? And why is this so dangerous? Why is this border so dangerous? Why do so many bad things happen at and around the border there? And I don't think that's something we just easily dismiss with like a stock party lines response. And there's valid discussion on both sides of this issue and all sides of this issue, because it's not like, we are under this false impression that every issue only has two sides because we have a two-party system. That's not really the way it is. I think there's complexity around this issue. But what can be stated very simply is that it makes sense to me that we have border enforcement if these bad things are happening. It also makes sense that we ask the question, why are they happening and what can we do to solve the problem from the root? I don't think anyone should be offended or defensive about the idea of asking the question, why is this happening? How do we get to the root of the issue? And then obviously we're going to argue about that for a while because we're all going to have different perspectives on why it's happening and what's the actual cause. And it's probably multiple factors. Maybe I'll get to that in this video, maybe not. Let me go to the second story I want to tell. In 2020 also, very end of the year, this was at the beginning of the year, at the very end of the year, I started a business. And by 2020, would it have been 2024? I think this happened in 2024. That had grown into a transport business that was large enough that I had a DOT number, MC number, registered with the FMCSA, had employed people, had employees. There's the word I'm looking for. I had employees in a truck driving around the country doing hotshot work with brokers. Everything else was signed up on this load board called Central Dispatch. Not that the details matter, but it plays into the story a little bit. this load board is basically how you find shipments. So they found a shipment. I had two drivers employed, husband and wife team. Only the wife drove, whatever. Not really relevant to the story, but they found a shipment of a vehicle from, um, what's the name of the town? It's in eastern Washington. Name of the town slipping my mind. It's like the first Spokane, first major town on the east side of Washington if you were coming in from the east, so in from Idaho. And so from Spokane, they found a shipment that was going to New York City. It's a long shipment. It was, the payout was supposed to be like 24, 26, somewhere in there, $100. And I gave them the okay to take that shipment. They booked it, and there were a few things that seemed a little bit fishy from the get-go. Again, naive me, just kind of took it all at face value, didn't dig too deeply. This is supposed to be a cash on delivery shipment, which is not uncommon, especially on this particular platform. Long story short, it's also not uncommon, and this is a weird, unprotected thing about trucking in general, and it's a whole different discussion about how the government, the US government, puts all these regulations in place that make it harder for small business owners to have a shipping company of any kind. And those regulations are supposed to protect people, but so far I haven't seen how they protect those small business owners. It seems like it makes it a lot harder for us without any real benefit. And I don't see how the American people would feel that that's a good thing. Yeah, we need basic common sense regulations that we can all agree on, or most of us can agree on, that make our roads safer. Don't drive 24 hours straight, stuff like that. You operate within the weight capacity of your truck. You need a special license to go over a certain size and weight, because those vehicles take more skill to operate. All that's completely legit. But long story short, I'm getting off track again. It's not uncommon in that industry to do a drop off and then not get paid for any amount of time after that. It could be days, it could be weeks, it could even be months. I'm again getting sidetracked by details about this industry that I have feelings about. The reality is that weeks is not uncommon. Months is extremely rare, but payment taking weeks from the time of drop off is not uncommon. This was supposed to be paid relatively instantaneously, electronically. So this was supposed to be paid out. I don't even remember what platform it was supposed to be done on, but the payment was supposed to be made almost immediately upon drop off. In fact, it was stated basically as immediately. Long story short, again, they did the drop off, never got paid. The people who received the car, and this didn't need to be multiple people. Normally, you're shipping for one person, especially in the type of setting this was in. So the fact that there were multiple people there is a little weird too, in and of itself. They were all Spanish speaking. Again, I speak Spanish fluently. I don't have any problem whatsoever with someone speaking Spanish, including with speaking Spanish in the United States. There's no official language of the United States, and that was done intentionally by our founding fathers to make the statement that this is not a country that favors any one other nation of people. We don't favor the British, at least in theory. We don't favor the British. We don't favor the Germans. We don't favor the Dutch. We don't favor. We don't favor Arabic people. We don't favor Chinese people. We don't favor anybody. that's why we don't have an official language. But fortunately, I mean, maybe doesn't really matter what language the country started off speaking, because of the massive amount of influence that the United States has had on world history since its founding. Um, Whatever language we spoke here was kind of bound and determined to become a worldwide common language. And that's what has happened. And it's probably also somewhat inevitable that it was English. And I won't go into all the history that makes that the case, but partially because I don't know it well enough to explain it to you. But I think we all have some vague concept of the fact that English is a dominant language in the world and was a dominant language in the world at the time because of how much influence the Brits had had on world history up to that point, and how much empire building the British had done up to that point, and how far they had spread their culture and language. So, of course, that was a dominant culture and language in the United States, this new country that the Brits wanted to have control over, and in fact considered one of their colonies. Um, but anyways, so inevitably, of course, it was English. All of that to say, I don't care that they spoke Spanish. And I think that you are allowed and should be allowed to speak whatever language you want in the United States. It's a free country. And free means free, it's not selective. Um, I it's a big pet peeve of mine. It's more than a pet peeve. It's like um, something I'm completely opposed to. This idea that freedom applies only to certain types of people, or certain, you're free, but don't use your freedom that way or that way. No, it's a free country. That's what makes this country great. One of the things that makes it great. And I will stand up for it for every single person all the time. But what them speaking Spanish does tell me is that they're immigrants, specifically from most likely Mexico. This is just fact. Um, Statistically speaking, the majority of people who speak Spanish in this country are probably from Mexico. Not that it matters. What does matter is that I see a high likelihood that they're not here legally. Here's why. And like, listen carefully here because this is super important. People who come to America and go through the prescribed legal process. And we can debate, is that legitimate? Is it not legitimate? Should we have that process? Should we not have that process? Is the process working? Is it not working? How could it be improved? All of that is up for debate. So I'm not making a statement about that here, but what I'm saying is that people who come here through the legal process that has been prescribed by the United States, they are by and large, like um, very much by and large, law-abiding individuals once in this country. And that's super important. That's a point in favor um, of what we should all be in favor of in the first place, just based on uh, congruency and consistency with all the stated beliefs that are out there on both the right and the left. That's a point in favor of being welcoming and respecting the rights of our immigrant neighbors who have done it the right way. And by right, I mean the legally prescribed way, the way that has been um, named by the United States as this is what you do, or this is one of multiple things that you can do or are required to do to legitimately enter this country and be on the right side of the law in the process. That's not easy. The process to legally enter this country, especially from a country south of our border, is not easy. And the people who do it don't want to mess it up by engaging in unlawful activity. I'm not saying they'd engage in unlawful activity otherwise. Very likely they don't want to anyway, but there's a little extra incentive there because you've gone through the trouble of stating your intention to move to this country, of letting the US take your name, take your information, put that in a database, know who you are. You're not some nameless person who's just going to get away with whatever you want. You're actually somebody who's under even greater scrutiny than the average person. I don't think that anybody who's come to America from south of the border legally and went through all the trouble and intention of raising their hand and saying, here I am, take my information down, is then going to go rip somebody off in a significant way like this. So we weren't paid at all for this delivery. I don't even remember if I said that yet. We weren't paid at all because, not because someone like, at the last minute decided they didn't want to pay or didn't have the money or there was a dispute or anything like that. It was just a scam. And this is where I would ask people to be understanding of the frustration that hardworking Americans feel who are in these lines of work where you're actually exposed directly to the impact of some sort of crime like that. Because it is kind of easy, if that's not your life, that's not your experience, to think that stuff like this doesn't happen. To think that, the only purpose ICE could serve is just to separate families and nitpick, court proceedings or even ignore court proceedings, which I think they are doing all of that. So don't get me wrong. Any process can be abused, no matter how good the intentions of the process are or how good the press about the process is. There's a lot of really good justification for what was done during COVID, right? Because hundreds, thousands of people did actually die from COVID. And keeping people safe sounds like a really good reason to put restrictions on people's rights. But you still have to ask yourself, is it worth it? And is it even constitutional? Is it even allowable that this could even be a thought in this country, in America, given what it is founded on, given what it is based on? And the same question needs to be asked now, because we're getting the same sales pitch for what ICE is doing in some instances, depending on what the directive is, depending on where they're working, depending on what their assignment is. But in some instances, there's cases of people who are American citizens being wrongfully detained or arrested without due process. There's cases of people who are in the process of becoming citizens and they are doing everything right and they are going to all their court hearings and they haven't committed a crime and they are literally doing it the right way, the way that has been prescribed by the United States of America, and they're getting deported anyways. Don't put people in that position. I'm going a little bit off track here, but don't put people in that position where they have to decide between showing up to their court case and possibly being arrested right there at the court case as they're going about it the right way, or deciding to stop doing it the legal way. And then they become in this category that is more likely to commit a crime because everyone just thinks I'm illegal anyway, right? If I get caught even existing, I'm going to get deported. So now it's harder for me to get a job. I'm scared to send my kids to school. I'm scared to go to work. I'm scared to participate in society in any sort of above board legitimate way. Now I have more incentive to commit a crime and less incentive not to, because I'm already facing the deportation either way. All right, I think that's a completely reckless, irresponsible, um, and disrespectful way to approach enforcement. And it's hard to even call it enforcement if we're grabbing people who are doing it the right way while they are literally in the process of doing it the right way. Like people literally being grabbed directly out of their court hearings that they showed up to because they are committed to doing it the right way. Not okay. What's also not okay is people who are actually illegal and actually not just here illegally, but making illegal decisions, doing illegal things, committing actual crimes that affect American people. Heck, that affect any person. Um, and this is a case that was a case in which I'm confident those were um, illegal aliens, and I'll use that term. I know there's more politically correct terms out there, but I didn't make this video to be politically correct. Um, there's a lot of things that are illegal. I'll acknowledge that. Crossing the border into the United States without going through the correct legal process. That's one of many, many illegal things. And it's not in and of itself the most harmful illegal thing out there that someone could do. But does it happen in conjunction with, do some of those people who cross the border illegally intend to do more illegal things once here? Absolutely yes. And that's not something that we should need to shy away from in order to make points about not liking what ICE is doing in the specific way they're doing it in certain cases currently. Because I think I just made a pretty solid argument against the way that ICE is operating, at least in certain cases. And I did not need to gloss over the fact that there's an actual dangerous criminal element. Um, there's an actual dangerous demographic of criminal illegal aliens, um, and just people who decided to cross the border without ever intending to state their presence in this country through the legal process that exists to do that. Do I understand what that process is? No, I don't. And I can imagine it must be really hard for someone who wants to cross into the US and wants to do it legally to even know how to go about that. So I'm not trying to judge anybody whose sincere intention is to have a better life for themselves and for their family. I think most people are willing to work around any number of laws in that pursuit, including, and I've seen the Facebook posts from my conservative friends who say just how far they would go and just how many laws they would break to defend, protect, or better their own family. Okay? I can respect that. I'm not here to judge you, but I'm also not going to judge a Mexican father for having the exact same perspective. But I will say that when you choose to cross into the US and you never even try to go through a legal process, you know that there is a legal process, you don't pursue it. I think there's a deeper discussion we can have, but I will say on the surface, I don't feel horrible for that person when they do get deported, especially if there's no like extreme extenuating circumstance, like their life was directly in danger for some reason when they made that decision. It's when you did that, you knew the possible outcomes of it. And same for any of us who decides to skirt around any law. We know the possible outcomes of that decision. Again, there's a deeper debate to be had here. Most of us, most everybody breaks laws on a daily basis. Every time you drive, you probably speed. Um, and then it kind of goes up and out from there. Um, so what do we do with that? I think that's really complex. I probably won't try to dive into it. But I will say I contacted the local police about this incident, got nowhere. I literally left a voicemail, never got a response. Tried to send an email, like couldn't even figure out who to send it to. I don't remember exactly what happened. I remember that I tried to get in touch with the police in New York to report this crime and had no luck there. I also don't think it would be productive to contact ICE about it. And that highlights how much we need law enforcement that is able to act, willing to act, and able to collaborate and cooperate with each other in appropriate ways. Because it's very frustrating to be ripped off of $2,400 and feel like law enforcement isn't working for you. You know, law enforcement isn't going to do anything to bring those criminals to justice. And I would argue if they are, in fact, illegal immigrants, which I would very much be willing to stake a bet on. And again, it would be disrespectful to the many good, hardworking, legal immigrants, or even immigrants who are going through that process to be legal to the very best of their ability, and who are working hard, who are honest, who are good people. It would be so disrespectful to them to assume that the people who did this were not illegal immigrants. Because I promise you, this is not just a Mexican thing. This is not just how every Mexican acts and operates. So I don't know if anyone's having a knee-jerk reaction like, you can't just assume they were illegal. I'm not assuming. The evidence is that they were willing to break laws. And if they're willing to break a law that's like actually holds a criminal penalty, that is actually a crime, that's actually intended for their personal gain at the expense of harming somebody else, then I'm pretty darn sure they're willing to break the law of you're required to be documented when you cross into this country. Because that's kind of a victimless crime itself. There's no direct victim. There's no one who's directly, immediately harmed because somebody from Mexico crosses the border into the U.S. We can argue about, economic implications of that and cultural implications, or, whatever you want to argue about. I think it's all a bunch of hooey to say that legal, hardworking, honest people entering our country that is not very densely populated harms anybody, unless you just kind of are anti-brown people or anti-Hispanic people, anti-people who have a first language of Spanish, anti-Mexican or some other thing. Like, they come in, okay, sure, and sure, anybody who comes in and just immediately jumps onto welfare, that's not going to be good for our country. And I also don't think that's primarily what's happening. I think that it would be reasonable to take steps to make sure it doesn't happen. I think it would be reasonable to exclude people from welfare if they have just crossed from another country, because it's like, hey, you were capable of making that journey. I think you're capable of getting a job. And I think correct me if I'm wrong, and please send your source, because I'm not making any claims I can't substantiate, or at least make a logical argument about here. Most of what I'm talking about is based on a logical argument, um, and I'm admitting where I don't know. I don't have evidence. I can't tell you that I'm positive that immigrants, legal or illegal, can't sign up for welfare, soon after arriving in the United States. I imagine that there's already some, if not a lot of, protection against that happening. But correct me if I'm wrong, and send your documents, because I'm admitting I don't know for sure, because I don't have those documents. I don't have proof. So if you could tell me I'm wrong about that, great, but please send me the evidence that you know what you're talking about. And I want to say for the record, I'm all for saying that you don't go on welfare when you cross into the United States. That's not your plan. If it is your plan, you're going to be disappointed, because that's not how it's going to go. We're not going to allow that. And I think most people would agree with that. Maybe there's room for some nuance there, but maybe there's not. Maybe there's not. And I don't want to try to go too deep into that. I think that the people who ripped me off as a business owner were illegal immigrants. I think that's a very logical conclusion. And I wish that there was cooperation from different levels of government and state, local, federal to get those people out of our country, out of the country. Definitely out of a position where they can continue to rip people off. And I'm concerned with an ICE mandate that seems to be more focused on, what are we even doing? Right? We've seen, everyone on both sides has seen the memes with the numbers. President Trump's deported like 2 million people compared to, 8 million for Obama. I'm not positive on Obama's numbers, but it's significantly higher for Obama. It's like 10 million for Bush, or I'm sorry, 10 million. Yeah, maybe 10 million for Bush and 12 million for Clinton. Why are we doing so badly with deportations? I don't believe the narrative that it is solely because blue states aren't working well enough with the federal government. Is there some obstruction there? I'm confident there is. And I'm confident that there's some political, there's some political BS going on there. There's some decisions being made based on, political party, not based on what's best for America, what's best for the local people, what's best for the state, etc. I don't see a whole lot of reason for controversy over turning over criminals to be deported. I really don't. I think there's a deeper discussion we can have. Why is this happening? What are we doing as a major world power that enables a criminal class in certain other countries that relate to the United States in a specific way, including importing drugs? Why is the U.S. such a big market for the drugs? We don't need to ask so much, why are they such a big producer? Well, they're a big producer because they have this massive market ready to buy directly to the north of them. Um, so they're meeting a market demand. Why is there such a big market demand in the United States? Because that's where we can focus. And if we're only focused on what's going on in someone else's country, we're not addressing the part of that equation that's taking place in this country. So again, I'm for those nuanced conversations, but uh, I don't see the reason for a whole lot of dispute over saying, "Hey, we don't really want criminals in our country, in this country." I'm not trying to use the possessive there, but we don't want criminals. We don't want to be exposed to criminals, period. And if this potential exists to say, well, that criminal is not here legally in the first place, so we can get rid of them fairly easily. Now, is there a deeper discussion to have there? What happens after they go back to Mexico? Is this really making America safer? Or are we returning somebody to a place where they're inevitably going to get right back into a position to commit crimes against the United States again? Okay, so I think there's conversations we have to have there. But the situation I'm talking about also is not even a situation where they've been turned over. They're not in jail yet, right? So even if we want to argue about what's the best thing to do once someone gets to jail, I'm pretty sure there's not a whole lot of controversy over somebody rips you off. You want to see them come to justice and specifically not be able to rip you or anybody else off again. But we don't have cooperation for that. And we don't have effective law enforcement right now either on the part of ICE. And that's part of the problem. It's not just blaming these cities that have a different perspective on welcoming immigrants. It's like, why is ICE itself not more effective at going directly after criminals? Because if that was literally all you were doing, you wouldn't have the massive public outrage and um, and the negative press and all of the uh, pressure to back down or back away. President Bush was a Republican too. President Bush was very unpopular in a lot of ways for some good reasons, including an unnecessary war in Iraq that cost many American lives and many innocent Iraqis' lives. Yet President Bush managed 10 million deportations without constant scandal. And this is not just that people randomly decided they don't like Donald Trump. People did decide they don't like Donald Trump, but it wasn't random. Um, there are specific things people don't like, including the way that ICE is operating. I want ICE to track down and remove the individuals who ripped me off, and any who are doing the same or similar things to other people. That's where I want their priority. I don't want their priority to be pepper spraying, beating, and in some cases shooting American citizens who aren't on board with what they're doing. Because if you're doing that kind of stuff, I'm not on board with it either. And we can understand that what happened with Renee Good and with Alex Preddy are both fairly isolated incidences at this time. But ICE engaging in inappropriate force against and inappropriate arrests of American citizens um, is not that limited. You have them pepper spraying protesters who are on the sidewalk in Phoenix recently. You have them tear gassing, pepper spraying um, protesters who are on sidewalks in other cities. You have them engaging in the policing of protesters at all when there's no um, immigration enforcement directly even occurring, and they're not a police force. They're not meant to be a police force. They shouldn't be being used as a police force. All this time they're spending just clashing with protesters. Just let the protesters protest. That's not your job. Um, Not your job to focus on them. That's not where I want your energy to be. Because I agree with what people who voted for Trump are saying about this one. They voted for illegal immigrants to be deported, and in some cases, some of them voted for all of them to be deported. Um, I'm not sure I'm really there, but I am there with criminal, illegal immigrants who have committed crimes since arriving in the United States. I'm 100% there for them to be deported. And I wish that was the only place that ICE's attention was focused, because then they might be more efficient and effective at doing that important job. And even if somebody's naive, has no idea that, bodies get dumped on the northern side of the US-Mexico border, and that's why we've got border protection down there. They have no idea that there are illegal immigrants, like actually legitimately scamming hardworking American business owners all the time. Even if they are inappropriately, in my opinion, inappropriately demonstrating against ICE because they don't understand what ICE actually does or is supposed to do. They don't understand the legitimate role that the organization has and the reason that it's there. Or at least historically, the reason it's there. I do think it's been abused by this administration, and I'm going to say that plainly and clearly. But, even if someone is naive to the legitimate reason we have ICE in the first place and the legitimate role that they should, and in most cases still do play, and they're demonstrating against ICE, and even if that's stupid on their part, it's still America. It's still a free country. They still have the right to demonstrate, and ICE is not a police force for law enforcement not related to immigration enforcement. They should not be policing those things. They should certainly not be spraying people or engaging with people in any other kind of violent way who are exercising their right to protest and to free speech. And yes, there are some destructive protesters out there. There are some isolated incidences where the protests go too far or there's intentional rioting or whatever. That is not the vast majority of what's happening. Anyone who tells you that it is has an agenda that they're pushing at the expense of reality and truth, because that's not the way that most protesters are conducting themselves. And we have the video evidence that protesters are being met with force, being met with violence when they are exercising their rights, and no more than that. And that's not okay. So I hope that, this is like an hour long now, I hope that gives some sort of a balanced viewpoint on ICE, from my opinion. And you might be thinking like, wow, you're all over the place here. I mean, the reality is that we kind of get forced into one camp or the other, both of which are wrong on almost like half of all issues, or half wrong about any given issue, because we feel like we have to put a label on anything. And like, and I've seen this so much, as soon as someone's saying something that doesn't quite match your political view, it's like, well, you're a Republican, or well, you're a Democrat, so nothing you say matters. There should be room to be something other than a Democrat or a Republican. Why do we think that there's going to be, one group that has all of the truth and the other one's just complete idiots? That doesn't make sense. That's not consistent with accurate assessment of life. And if you kind of fall into one of those camps, it might be because you haven't had some life experiences. Your whole worldview is just shaped by the arguments you've heard and bought into on this news source or that news source, or this Facebook feed or that Facebook feed. And if you actually go out, and experience some different things, you're gonna see the complexity of the world we live in and the nuance of the world we live in. And all of those, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, all of those viewpoints are gonna break down. Whether it's that you go to Peru and you're like, oh wow, I was told I was supposed to be scared, but this is a bunch of really nice people. And it breaks down your stereotype or whatever fear you had of people in that culture. Or whether it's you are more prone to assume that everybody's good everywhere, then you go to the U.S.-Mexico border, or at least certain parts of it, because I've been to other border towns that are completely chill. But you go to certain parts of it and you're like, man, this is scary. Oh, it's scary because people are doing bad things. And we can have discussions about how exactly to address that, but like, we have to acknowledge that people are doing bad things. This isn't this fairy tale that I thought it was. So anyways, those are some of my thoughts. Thanks for watching this video, and I hope it gave you some sort of insight into maybe something you hadn't considered before. There's also a lot I have not considered before, or don't necessarily know about. There's a lot of debate around this issue and stances around this issue that I kind of wanted to touch on and did not touch on. One of them being, and this will be for a future video, I think, the idea that no one is illegal on stolen land. I think that one's worth a conversation all by itself. And I think that is kind of a follow-up conversation that takes a whole different perspective on a lot of what I just talked about. But anyways, yeah, I hope that if you have new information for me, or you're watching this and you have thoughts about it, please share those with me. Because just because I've learned a couple things in my experience of life as it relates to these issues does not mean that I don't have more to learn. And I really believe in communication. That's why I made this video in the first place. So again, thanks for watching, and catch you later.